They had totally different plants than we did. All 38 gardens here that we were working with had exactly the same plants. So the idea was to basically look at total degree days. We're going to talk a lot about that and how they affect plant growth. And we'll go from there. I have quite a bit of history too. A lot of the records that were kept a long, long time ago, including my grandfather and my uncle who had diaries which kept information like this every day. He could tell you 5 years or so back what happened on every day. And I think after a while, that sort of became the phenology part of it. But today, as we look at phenology, we actually um, get up in the morning, we look out the window and we look and see what the weather is. That's part of phenology. Is it raining? Is it going to be sunny? Is it cloudy? What's going to happen during the day? So everything that we look at works with phenology, and I'll get more into that as we go. We're not moving ahead here.
Advancing.
Yeah.
Hmm. Okay. If you want to hit it in that corner.
That corner there.
Yep. Oh,
Okay.
whoops. I'm sorry. I need to
Back it up.
back it up. Sorry, people. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, this is probably one of the programs I gave back in 2017, and I was awarded a phonology shirt which said, "This is not a bump on your head." And a lot of people are a little bit confused when you said something about phonology. And I remember when I became a master gardener in 2008, I was interviewed by one of the master gardeners, and his name was Tom Beckett. And he lived back, we had several meetings at his place. He lived back a lane in the woods. He knew every tree and every shrub ever planted, and he was just a very interesting individual. He was a retired Methodist minister, actually, before he became a master gardener. Uh, Other than Tom, myself, I grew up on a family farm. Uh, After that, from Ohio State University, I worked in the agriculture end of it basically all my life until I was 68 years old. And at that point, I still wanted to keep my hands in the soil and work with the agriculture end of it. And wasn't really didn't really know how to do that until I read something in the paper that Master Gardeners was having a new class. So Tom Beckett was one that interviewed me, and one of the first things he asked me was, "Do you know what phonology is?" And I never heard of the word, period. I had no idea what it was. He went ahead to explain it. And after about 2 years, I found myself totally involved in that part of it. Um, we talked about a bump on your head, and that is almost spelled like phonology, but it's phrenology. It was primarily focused on the measurements of a human skull and based on the amount of brain power you might have within that skull area. Uh, so even though these ideas are basically not really used today, it was a way that people at one time looked at the capacity of a person's mind. So phonology, though, getting back to that, is a study of recurring biological events. And if you go to our phonology garden out here, you'll probably see a sign that gives us a detailed information of what it actually is. A recurring study, natural events and relationships to weather. And if we start to study relationships this year to weather, we've had quite a strange uh, amount of weather so far as cold and early, hot in the summer, and it wasn't a continuous even type recurrence. It's also a study of cyclic events of nature in response to seasonal climate changes in the environment. And this all has to do with the emergence of plants, the budding of trees. And I would guess if you would go out to Lynn's fruit farm, they would probably could tell you exactly when they would have to start spraying their fruit trees or any of the orchards. And I'm sure if you go out here to Wilson's Garden Center, they're probably looking at their spring inventory, what they're going to grow, maybe what they're going to uh, have for sale in the spring. So all these things kind of hinge around climate changes. And it's a sequence of natural events through the season. We had a couple that I was familiar with, and they were never master gardeners, but they were elderly couple that went down to Dawes Arboretum every week and actually looked at the bird nests to see how many eggs were in the nest, whether there was any that hatched. They kept track of that for Dawes Arboretum. So there's a lot of different ways to keep track of phenology. From Wikipedia, phenology is a study of periodic plant and animal life cycle events and how these are influenced by seasonal and interannual variations in climate. And probably one of those is we're going to talk about this a little later on, but of the hummingbirds going south, flying back, the monarchs leaving and flying into Mexico. The word phenology is basically from Greek phenano, which is to show light or make appear. The dates of egg laying of birds and amphibia, and I'm not sure how many of you have ever seen a frog egg or maybe even a tadpole, but that's part of the amphibia and egg laying. Of course, birds, we usually look for robins in the spring. We look for the hummingbirds flying back north and usually the males will come first and look at the area to see what's available. And a lot of times they go right back to the same area. There's parts of Lake Erie where a lot of these birds fly into sort of a rest period as they fly north, and they get quite a large crowds of bird watchers looking at that. Uh, Also, phenology uh, looks at the timing of the development of cycles of honeybee colonies, and of course, this has to do with pollinating as much as honeybee production, whether there's going to be nectar out there for them, what is blooming for them to get their nectar for their honey. And it's very sensitive to small variations in climate, especially temperature. Back, I think it was in maybe around the middle of May this year, about the 15th of May, I looked at the growing degree days, and we were headed for the coldest growing degree days so far as plant growth since 2012. It had been the coldest year since 2012 we ever had for plants. And after a while, we're going to take a look at what we're doing right now. But phenology records can be used very easily for historical climatology, especially study climate change and global warming. And we sure have had that so far as uh, the globe, actually, the whole globe we live in. Grape harvests in Europe have used and reconstructed a record of summer growing season temperatures going back over 500 years. So phenology records have been kept for a long, long time. regardless of what they called them. They kept records of them, and that's how they actually were able to take care of the grape production in Europe. Oh, I went too fast here somehow.
Let's see. We might be able to back it up like, oops, previous. There we go.
Yeah, can we go back some more?
Is that it?
I think we're good. Okay. Um, yeah, the concept of growing degree days is what we actually keep track of climate change. And if there's one thing in this presentation I want everybody to understand and get a good feel for, and that is growing degree days. So how do we do that? So how do we determine it? We use a base temperature of 50 degrees. That's what most plants will start growing at that temperature, especially soil temperature. Corn will start to sprout at 50 degrees. A lot of your vegetables will actually start to grow colder than 50 degrees because uh, they have that ability to do that. They're bred to do that. We add the high and the low temperature together for the day and divide by 2. So if the temperature today was 60 and we got down to 40 tonight, that's about 100 degrees, isn't it? Divide that by 2 and we come up with 50. So how many degree days did we have today? We didn't have any because we used the base temperature of 50. We subtracted 50 from the 100, and so we never made it. If we had 80 degrees for a high and a 50 degrees for a low, that's 130 degrees divided by 2, that's 65 degrees. And the number of growing degree days we would have today would be 15. Subtract the base temperature of 50 from the 65, and you end up with 15. So there's another part to this, and if you have a day of like maybe tomorrow 40 degrees, and it gets down to, let's say, freezing tomorrow night would be 70. Uh, I mean, you get down to 30, that'd be 70 degrees. Subtract 50. So you're going to have a minus. We can't take temperature away from anything. We can't stop plant growth. We have a certain size plant, so it's just going to stay where it is. We just didn't gain any degree days. This is what you need to do if you have, if you want to take a look at growing degree days, go to ardcohiostate.edu. What I usually do, I just use my cell phone and I'll say Ohio State growing degree days, and it will pull up a series of things to look at. And I always look at the calendar. That's what we need to do. This is what you would get. This is Ohio State Phenology calendar. Uh, Denise Ellsworth, which I think spoke at our conference last year.
Yes, she did.
Yes, she did. Her mother lived in Licking County. She may not be living anymore. I'm not sure if she's passed or not. But if you pull that up, make sure that correct date is in there. We did this November 12th, and it automatically came up there. It should come up automatically if you use your cell phone, the date, and even your zip code. Put your zip code in there because it's going to be a little different. If you lived in Cincinnati, it's going to be different. Your growing degree days is different in Cleveland than it is in Cincinnati or Columbus. So at that point, then, after you put your zip code in there, click on Show Me the Calendar, and this is what you'll probably find. You'll see here on the 12th of November, we had 4,008 Yeah, 4,008 growing degree days. In addition to that, you'll see a series of pictures to the left of that screen, which would show what is happening now. It might show a development of trees blooming or whatever it might be. Here, while we have late in the season, is showing some egg hatch of scale and some boar, which, you know, we're not really that concerned about if we don't have that problem, but it does give you some information of what to look for. What I use this for a lot, not only looking at the total degree days, like 4,008 that comes up automatically, I go to the summary page, and here it gives me a summary for 20 years of growing degree days in my area. And if I go down to the bottom, it says the 20-year growing degree average for Newark was 3,849 growing degree, 3,649 degree growing days. Um, okay, we had 4,008 on the other calendar, which means if we look down through here, this is the second warmest growing season so far as growing degree days we've had since last year. 2024 was 4,289 growing degree days. This year we have 4,008. I just looked at it today. We have 4,026, I think it is, 24 maybe. So we've actually gained, even though we've had cold weather, we've actually gained a few growing degree days. Not very many, but we've gained a few. But it's interesting to look down through the last 20 years here and see what kind of growing degree days we had. Um, we might, this year, we're going to end up more than what the average is. I understand that, but if we were under the average, my granddad says one system always follows another. And if you have a real cold time, you'll have a real hot time. We had a real cold spring. We had a warmer summer with a lot of extra heat. And so we've averaged it out pretty much, but we're ahead of the 20-year average. If you're looking at the international information, which is basically what a lot of the early scientists used, 1 degree Celsius equals 33.5 degrees Fahrenheit. And if you're looking at any information on a computer, it might say 9/10 of a Celsius degree, which would be like 30 degree extra Fahrenheit. So you have to kind of look at that if you're looking at anything other than Ohio State information or information here in the United States. But if we look at Celsius, uh, it can change an awful lot. And I'm going to talk about some things that could happen with more growing degree days. And mostly that deals with um, bird activity, bird egg hatching, and food for those birds after the birds hatch. Corvallis Linnaeus was a Swedish botanist and physician and zoologist. He pretty much laid the foundations in modern scheme of binomial nomenclature. And if they had a nomenclature here in their instruction,
I don't think we've talked about
nomenclature.
nomenclature. No.
Okay. Um, most of the names we use here for our plants are common names. Most of the nomenclature that these founders used was international usage of Italian or Greek. And I was never very good at English, let alone all those other languages. But um, Carlos continued to classify plants and animals and minerals in the 1740s to 1760s, which was quite a while ago and was the most acclaimed scientist in Europe at that time. Another one which I see more of is Robert Marsham. He was an English naturalist, and most of these early scientists were called naturalists. He was considered the founding father of phenology and the study of the seasons, plants, and animals. And it recorded 27 different signs of spring, starting in 1736 and continuing over 60 years until he actually passed away. But probably the signs of spring was the flowering of plants, the budding of the trees, the songbirds that he heard when he was out walking, uh, maybe the buds on some of the other trees that he saw in the woods and the forest that he was walking around in. This is one thing that Marsham said. The winter of 1739 to 1740 was the coldest year on record. And he said, contents of my chamber pots frequently froze overnight. And that would be pretty bad. And the turnip crop was completely destroyed. So he was big in turnips. And he said his farm produced a turnip weighed 19 pounds, 39 and a half inches around. We don't see a lot of turnips here, but I know a lot of the sheep producers in Ohio were using turnips as a summer crop when their pastures actually died off from summer's heat. The turnip crop haven't had enough vegetation there for the animals to graze and continue growth. But you don't see a lot of that anymore. But that's one way that the turnips are actually used here in Ohio. Henry David Thoreau, he was one of my favorites. Um, he was totally different. A picture of 1854 there shows that he was, let's see, I'll check this out. Yeah, he passed away in 1862. So he was 44 years old, I think, at that point. Um, but anyway, Henry David Thoreau was a different kind of an individual. He got his degree from Harvard. He went to Harvard when he was 16 years old, got his degree, but he got his master's, but he wouldn't accept the degree. And at that time, they called them sheepskins. And when I was at Ohio State, we still called them sheepskins at Ohio State, but they weren't sheepskins. They were a piece of paper. Uh, Sheepskins were used back in his time. Henry said he thinks that every sheep ought to keep its own skin, and he wouldn't take it. So, but he was from Concord, Massachusetts, and he kind of stumbled around up there and didn't live a very long life. Actually, I lived to be 44 years old. He was a naturalist, according, of course, and he liked nature. Uh, he got into a lot of the authors and book people up in the Concord, Massachusetts area. And one of his famous quotes that I just pulled up here as I was looking for some new things to look at, he said, while England endeavors to cure the potato rot, it will not endeavor to cure the brain rot, which prevails so many more widely in fatality. And that was taken from his Walden book of 1854. So this is what artificial intelligence says about all this. Today, brain rot reflects a worry that it's consuming the internet's waves and memes and video clips, especially on social media, that might even numb one's noggin. So I thought that was pretty clever what artificial intelligence would say about Henry David Thoreau's quote. Uh, So I think, yeah, probably be losing your mind. And there are people, I think, losing their mind. We're worried about artificial intelligence, that's for sure. Like I said, he studied at Harvard. Henry David Thoreau never received a diploma. He declined his master's degree. He said he didn't have any benefit, no economic merit. He wasn't going to make any money. He wanted to let every sheep have its own skin. And he returned to Concord, Massachusetts, basically after Harvard, and met Ralph Waldo Emerson, which was a big writer and thinker too. Became pretty good friends with Waldo and Ralph Waldo Emerson, and he introduced him to a lot of different people in the Concord area during the Walden years. Uh, he said, it's where I lived and what I lived for, but he refused to pay taxes. He didn't think he had to pay taxes. Well, he found out a little bit different after he spent 2 days in the jail, and then he decided he ought to pay taxes. He was, I guess, a character at that point. And later in years, he was fascinated with natural history, and he really got into botany. Um, in 1835, he got tuberculosis and became ill with bronchitis and pretty bad. And his dying words was, "Now comes the good sailing," and moose and Indian. I'm not sure what that ever meant, but that was his last words. But Ralph Waldo Emerson kind of took a liking to him, and he knew that Henry David was quite a naturalist. Told Henry, he said, "I've got a woods out there with a big pond." And he said, "If you would like," he said, "you could just go out there and live out there and take notes of what you see." Well, this pond happened to be about 61 acres. And I think from what I've read, that it was carved out by a glacier maybe 10 to 15,000 years ago, even. It's pretty deep. You could almost see to the bottom of it. I took a vacation one time and I told my wife at that point, I said, "I got to go to Concord, Massachusetts. I got to take a look at this, see what Henry David was talking about on Walden Pond and what he did." And every day, Henry, after he built his one-room cabin, walked around that pond, uh, took information of what he saw, wrote it down. If anybody else saw Henry David, he always had a telescope in one hand, and then if he was carrying anything that he picked up, any seeds or any leaves or anything that he saw when he on his walk, he put them in the top of his hat, which he called his bottom box. But that's a reconstructed view of Henry's cabin. It's very quaint, not much there other than a place to sleep and a fireplace to keep warm with and a writing desk. This is a sign that we saw when we went into the area and into the wooded area and looked at the pond. Henry said, "I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discovered that I had not lived." So Henry was out there to see everything in the winter and the spring, everything growing, every bird, every nest, every sound. And that was what Henry called living. We had I may have mentioned this too, we had a speaker. Uh, I think he might have been from Wisconsin at one of our conferences one year. And he said, "If you ever take anyone for a walk in the woods or out just for a walk in nature, take someone younger than you." And it's the question of, Henry says, not what you look at, but what you see. And Henry wrote those kinds of things down. And even even my granddad and my uncle, who kept nothing but diaries, they didn't have a TV, they didn't have computers. They had coal oil lamps for light. And in the evening, and maybe they only got a newspaper once a week, in the evening, they sat there and wrote in their diary. And I imagine that's what a lot of people did back during those days. Henry said, never look back unless you're planning to go that way. And I think that's pretty good information to follow. What lies behind us and what lies ahead of us are tiny matters compared to what lives within us. And I think as we look at our lives and what we've done, uh, it's the little things inside that we remember and remember for a long time. I lived in Virginia for about 5 years, and my wife worked at Charlottesville, so she crossed the Blue Ridge Mountains every day. But on the other side of Charlottesville, and of course we lived in the valley, the Shenandoah Mountain Valley, and in Charlottesville and Monticello, well, it was Thomas Jefferson's home, and he built that home and probably a real high location. If you've ever been to Charlottesville, you've probably been there. And Thomas Jefferson looked down on the university as it was being built, but he was quite a traveler and he traveled many different locations uh, in the country, primarily France, but a lot of people knew that he was a naturalist. He was collecting seeds. He wanted to grow them here in Monticello. And so he brought a lot of people sent him seeds. This is a picture of this garden that he grew. It was 1,000 feet long, and these are seeds from all over the world. He was trying to figure out what did good here in this country. After they moved about 3,000 yards of soil off of this steep ridge, this steep mountain. Um, and that mountain was like the one behind us right there. To even grow this. Well, if you ever built a new home or moved into a new property and tried to plant anything around your house, it's probably the soil that came out of your basement. This is pretty much the soil that came out of the side of this mountain. Not Henry, Thomas Jefferson was a complete failure for several years growing anything on this. And they just started to load it up with all different kinds of manure that they had in the area and built the soil fertility. Anything that produced humus and organic matter they would use. And after a few years, why it was in production. So he was able to keep track of a lot of the plants that he grew, what was working in the area. Since this was in Virginia, one of the big crops was tobacco, of course. And that's where I got my idea for my pioneer garden out here was grow crops in this garden that you normally don't see any other place in the area. And tobacco was one of them. Tobacco would grow in real poor soil. And it became pretty much the money crop for most of the area. So these are some of the past phenology records that we look at and things that people have written down. If oaks, ash, if oaks before ash, you're in for a splash. And as if before oak, you're in for a soak. So if you get some blooms on your tree, or some leaves on your tree, and you get drowned it out, you're going to be in for probably a soak if it comes up early. But the indications can be pretty unreliable as one forecasts immediate conditions and one forecasts future conditions because like we had this year, we had the coldest growing season to start with, and then we ran into some real hot weather toward the end, and now we're the second hottest growing season in the last 20 years. More current, when oak leaves are as big as a squirrel's ear, it's time to plant corn. A lot of the farmers used these kind of phenology records, and it was because this is what they recorded in their diaries year after year, and they found out that when the oak leaves are as big as the squirrel's ear, which they didn't have to look at squirrel's ear, they knew what that looked like. It was time to plant corn. That meant that the soil was warm enough. Um, and out here in my pioneer garden, as I was telling Gene, one year I decided to plant the crops based on the light and the dark of the moon. Plant the crops that grew under the soil, like carrots or radishes, potatoes, in the dark of the moon. Plant the crops that grew above the soil, like your leafy vegetables, tomatoes, and that above the soil. And that should produce good crops in both cases. And we did that one year. We didn't have any comparison, but everything did well. When the red buckeyes bloom, it's time to put out your hummingbird feeders. And normally you'll see the male hummingbirds come back and start to look for the areas. Uh, we're not talking about Ohio buckeyes here. We're talking about red buckeyes. Red buckeyes have a red bloom. The Ohio buckeyes have a white bloom. But normally you'll start to see some hummingbirds when it gets to be about that time. Plant plant beets and squash, carrots when the dandelions bloom. That means the soil is warm enough for the dandelions to bloom, or it's warm enough for the beets and squash and carrots to be planted and come up. This is the red buckeye tree that I talked about. And if you can imagine the hummingbird flying 500 miles to the Gulf of Mexico, and they don't weigh very much, and they don't even stop for anything. And they do this every spring and fall to find homes up in this area in Central America. It takes about 18 to 24 hours. So if we don't have anything blooming at that time, where are they going to get their nectar from? You know what? They're going to be pretty tired. So it's time to put out your hummingbird feeders. If you have plants blooming, you'll probably see them around those plants trying to get the nectar, to get the sugars that it takes to get their body moving again. Another real old book was from the 1790s, was Poor Will's Almanac, and that's full of all kinds of, it's almost like a farmer's almanac. It goes back years and years and years of dates of what actually happened throughout the years. These are some of the quotes. We don't have that in this area, but we do hear the geese honking during the daytime, maybe going south because it's colder weather up north and they're heading for the south and the warmer temperatures. And when the second flowering of forsythia is ended, then gull migrations are finished too, which completes all major bird migrations activity through the nation's midsection. And I want to add something else to this too. And we found this to be true so far as fertilization of your lawns. And if you fertilize them too early for crabgrass, why you may not get near as good a control on the crabgrass if you wait till the forsythias have bloomed. So the crabgrass has gotten a little bigger. In the meantime, it's still not a seed. The Second flowering of the forsythia, the blooms are starting to drop. That means the soil is warmed up enough and probably the crabgrass has started to emerge some, so you can start to fertilize your lawns then after you see the forsythia starts to bloom. When crocuses and snowdrop foliage pushes up through the mulch, the first pussy willows will be cracking and the mistletoe will be visible high in the branches of Mississippi woodlots. Um, we don't have that here, but we do have crocuses and snowdrops, which is usually the first thing to come up and show life in the spring. Plant potatoes when the sad bush flowers. Who ever heard of a sad bush? Well, we have one out here in the learning garden.
Hmm.
If you go in the front gate, which is closest to the office here, the first big tree on the right is called a serviceberry. It is a shad bush. The shad, of course, is a fish, and when they start to migrate north in the rivers, most usually they're found in the oceans, but when they migrate north in the rivers along the ocean to spawn, why, it's time to plant your potatoes. Uh, this shad bush out here is called a serviceberry. And the reason it got its name serviceberry was from its northern climate where it came from. And when that serviceberry started to bloom, the ground was soft enough to bury the dead from the previous year.
Oh,
That's where the serviceberry came in. That's when you could have your service to bury the deceased from the winter before. It's also approximate time the gypsy moth eggs hatch, which we had a big problem several years ago, and I haven't heard that much about it. People were spraying and trying to kill the gypsy moth eggs around their trees. This happened mostly in the east and in Virginia. That's pretty bad. And if you come the highways back to Ohio from Virginia, you probably see in higher elevations where a lot of the trees were just plain dead. When the yellow forsythias and the crocuses are blooming, it's time to prune your roses and fertilize your lawn. And here again, the soil is starting to warm up. Tomatoes can be set out when the lily of the valleys are in full bloom. These are things that people wrote down years and years ago, and after over a period of time, they found out this happened at the same time every time. So that became sort of a way that they could continue to take care of their crops. Apple trees are in bloom in April, crop will be plentiful. If they bloom in May, the crop will be poor, and that's probably because in May the temperatures become warmer and the blooms aren't on the tree near as long. That's about the only thing I could figure out on that one. When elm leaves are as big as a shilling, you can plant kidney beans if you're willing. When the elm leaves are as big as a penny, you can plant kidney beans if you mean to have any. A lot of the Amish follow these practices yet. I was talking about playing in the signs of the moon, the dark of the light of the moon. And I was telling Gene, my granddad never dug a post hole, put a post in the light of the moon. He always put it in the hole in the dark of the moon because he said it would come right out of the soil in several years if you planted it in the light of the moon. A lot of people today plant corn at certain signs. Uh, the Amish definitely are sign planters. Um, what we look for around here a lot of times is our insect population. We see border forsythia, which we have one out here in the phenology garden. If it's blooming, this is the eastern tent caterpillar, not not the bagworm that a lot of you think is the tent caterpillar, but this is an eastern tent caterpillar. You'll probably see that about the same time as the forsythias are blooming. And if you want to treat that, watch your forsythia blooms. Common lilacs, we don't have the pine needle scale problem, but if you were probably growing Christmas trees, uh, white pines probably would start to show that. One of the old farmer sayings when I was growing up was if you have a good uh, bloom on the lilacs, you're going to have a good corn crop. Eastern red buds, here again, gypsy moth, egg hatch is happening about the time the red buds start to bloom. And that's one of the first blooms you'll see in most of our flowering trees. This is how we recorded information in our phenology garden. This is after the the grants were taken away from us, but most of these shrubs that we have, trees and shrubs, are really not available anymore. It'd be pretty hard to find a royal star magnolia. We have a PJM rhododendron out here. Uh, the Korean spice, you may be able to find those. The coral burst crab apple we still have out here, but I don't think you'll be able to find that anywhere if you want to go buy one. The lilac, the President Grevy lilac, I think you could probably buy. You might have to special order it. Um, the red twig dogwood, you probably would. The Miskim lilac, I know I still have one in my front yard. Miskim lilac. Viburnums, there was a problem with the viburnums at one time because there was a boar, a viburnum boar that was eating through the viburnums and was actually killing the whole viburnum. Cutley elderberry, we had one of those out here, and I did get rid of it because it was shooting up new sprouts all over the phenology garden. And one of the prettiest trees we have out here is I'm not sure it even bloomed this year, the Rose of Sharon, Blushing Bride. It's just a really beautiful blooming. If someone wanted to try taking a cutting of that and trying to root it, that would be great. You probably not find those anywhere. I don't even know where you'd start to go look for those. But these are some of the things that we look for when we were looking at the pollinator end of it and about the bloom time. The first bloom is going to be the gold-tide forsythia, of course, at 50 growing degree days. Royal Star Magnolia at 83, and it blooms every year that I've seen it out here. Beautiful magnolia tree. There's a lot of different magnolia cultivars that have come out of that, I'm sure, over the past years. So these are all dates where we could start to look for blooms. At one time, we had about 7 people in our phenology garden, our phenology committee, that would take a group of plants that their bloom times would sort of be together so they weren't be running out here every 2 or 3 days to check to see if there's any blooms. And they would take 6 or 7 plants, and when it was about their time to check them, why they would write their bloom times down. We'd send this information, like I said, to Worcester. And at that point, Worcester would collect all the information from the other 38 gardens in the state and send it in then to the national. So you can do this at home. You can take your growing degree days that we talked about earlier, keep track of it, look at your Ohio State calendar, You can write it down when they bloomed, keep track of it. Next year, see what happens. See if it's happening at the same time. This is the way it works. When the other signs, this is mostly on insects. When the star magnolia first blooms, look for adult emergence of the white pine weevil, and this would be if you'd have white pine trees. If you had a grove of Christmas trees, well, mostly white pine, which you don't see a lot of today, but they were a nice, soft decorating tree at one time. You might see the white pine weevil, which emerges early at 85 growing degree days. And then when the Forsythia blooms, 90-degree growing degree days, here you have the eastern tent caterpillar bloom. So we talked about that, showed you a picture of it earlier. When the Bradford Cowrie pear first blooms at 144 degrees, growing degree days, then watch out for the European pine sawfly. This is a species now that we're trying to eradicate totally, because if you go to Columbus, when these are blooming, this is all you see. Or if it's, and the birds have carried these pear seeds, these fruit seeds away to different areas. You find them around restaurants because the birds go there to collect food, maybe pieces of food that's been left around the restaurants. You see a lot of these cowrie pears, but if you go to Columbus, in Columbus, the highway is loaded with these things. Uh, Cities were growing Bradford pear trees because they were beautiful spring blooming tree, give you city a nice color in the spring. And then all of a sudden, the the trees started to produce fruit, and the birds carried the seeds to wherever they wanted to carry them. So now we're trying to get rid of all of them, which is going to be hard to do. The Rhodosia dogwoods, first blooming dwarf, farther gorilla is in full bloom, and 323 growing degree days, you check for the adult lilac borer. I haven't really seen that. It bores in the stalk of the lilac tree. Watch for Japanese beetles uh, last week in June. We're at 970 growing degree days, and the spirea is in full bloom at that time. And we used to go to the Outer Banks about the end of June because it was a nice time to go before the 4th of July. The prices were a lot less on the rentals down through there, and we enjoyed that time of the year. But every time we came home, we had a Japanese beetle attack on all of our shrubs and flowers and everything that they wanted to attack. They were thick, so we kind of missed that. If we watched the growing degree days, we would probably been a little better positioned. Korean spice viburnus, which you talked about, and watch for this leaf beetle, and it bores in the base of the twigs and branches and actually kills the viburnums. This is one bird that we don't have around here, but we're finding that maybe it could be a problem in the future. This is a flycatcher, which is basically came from Western Africa into Europe. And what has happened here, these birds hatch their eggs at a certain time, but if the growing degree days of the climate change is such, the insect population, especially the caterpillar population, is already gone, and the birds don't have anything to feed their young. And this is one thing that we're concerned about today. If our atmosphere in this area particularly warms up anymore, we got out of sync with some of the egg hatch with the birds and other things that we're trying to do. Uh, just like we talked about earlier, uh, 1 degree Celsius probably would increase plant growth by 5 days. which if that was the case, uh, things would be really out of whack. So it's all about producing food. It's all about pollination, bees and birds pollinating the food that we eat. Most of the things you buy in the stores today, and the vegetable end of it, even the fruit end of it, are pollinated by insects, pollinated by birds or bees. In the area of Canada, up in the real high plains, the huckleberries and the blueberries, could be already gone, and the bear are coming down the mountain and closer to the facilities in the towns and villages. So what have we learned, and what are we learning about all this anyway? And I think what we're learning and what we've seen is the atmosphere is definitely warming, whether it's the United States or other parts of the world. We're seeing temperature changes. It's very small, but it is warming. And we call this global warming. Um, Back several years ago, in 1977, this was all from Time magazine. In 1977, we talked about the big freeze we had. In 2001, we talked about global warming. You fry an egg in a skillet out in the sidewalk. And then in 2010, we talked about a holiday blizzard. And is this really global warming or what is this? But it was just change in atmospheric conditions that we're actually seeing a lot of that. And if you take a trip from here to Indiana, maybe going east, and you see a lot of the farmland now that the woods have been cleared, uh, the air currents have changed, and it's changing our climates. It's actually changing the amount of the the air and wind that we have. Most of you maybe have never heard of this. We have a doomsday seed vault in Norway. And several years ago, we collected seeds. I forget what it was for. And I think it was for a plant that was basically showing to be a problem. This was designed to protect the world's crop diversity, the food that we eat. It has millions of vegetable and trees and every kinds of seeds you can imagine in this vault, which is really on top of a high mountain. The temperature inside this mountain in this seed vault is minus 18 degrees year round. And it's a backup for gene banks to safeguard seeds against catastrophic events. Whether we have a war and it wipes everything out here on the surface in certain areas, or we have a climate change where we can't control production of food, or just plain natural disasters, maybe earthquakes, tornadoes, hurricanes, whatever it might be. So we do have a backup plan. Whether there's any of us going to be left after all this happens, I don't know, but let's hope we don't ever have to use it. This is a phenology garden. This is fairly long time ago, probably back in the 2017 when I first put this together. It's a little bit more overgrown now. This is what it looks like. These plants here. We had, I think, about 38 different plants that we were studying and taking data collection information on. It can be a beautiful area. We have things blooming all the time. Uh, Oak leaf hydrangea is there regardless. You have to keep cutting it back. It always blooms. Most of everything needs to be cut back. One person that wrote about gardening and phenology basically was Helen Hayes. She was called the first lady of American Theater, I think. And she said, all through the long winter, I dream of my garden. On the first day of spring, I dig my fingers deep into the soft earth. I can feel its energy and my spirits soar. Boy, does that affect me. I'm the same way. When it gets time to dig in the soil and I smell the fresh soil, it's actually good even to go out here and work in the greenhouse because you smell the plants growing, you smell the fresh soil. We watered thoroughly and everything smells springy. You can be out there on 30-degree days and it'll be 72 in there, just like spring. But clear back, Helen Hayes, I think, lived to be, she was fairly old. I think she passed away in 1993, maybe. Uh, but here she was into theater, but she still had time to think about her garden and probably a lot of the phenology things that we talked about here tonight. So I'm not sure if you have any questions. That's the end of my presentation. And if you do, I would be more than happy to try to answer them.
Okay, let's see. I'm gonna check the chat, see if we've got any, I think maybe something came up. Oh, here we are. Sorry. Okay. Any questions in the chat?
Can you repeat the
Okay.
definition of growing degree days? Yeah, the growing degree days is a mathematical equation actually based on the high and the low temperatures for a given day. And it's taken 365 days a year.
So I'm the one that asked that question. So the growing degree days isn't the number of days that the plant can grow. It's
That's
more
true.
of a measure of the heat, kind of the heat um,
Yeah,
content.
most usually the plants will not grow if it's less than 50 degrees. So we use 50 degrees as a baseline, and it doesn't,
50 degrees growing degree day, not 50 degrees Fahrenheit.
it's Fahrenheit. It's based on Fahrenheit.
Mm-hmm.
It's the high and the low temperature for the day divided by two minus
Right.
50. Yeah. So we're not going to have any today. I'm pretty sure we're not going to have any growing degree days today, but we keep track of them every day, you know. The university does
Mm-hmm.
with their phenology calendar.
So, Linda, I think an interesting thing that happened this past week when we've been having temperatures in the 50s, 60s is that one day it was still in the 60s at 10 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
So, so you're adding more growing degree days even when you've been in a period where you have maybe seasonal high temperatures and seasonal low temperatures, but
Yeah, if you took
um,
the 60 high and the 60 low and add them together, that's 120. And you take 50 off of that, that'd be like 70-degree days one day, and we're not really growing anything.
sure, yeah. Yeah. So part of the reason that I wanted Jim to provide this presentation is because I think it helps us get a deep understanding of why climate change, why warming is problematic. So, it's those wonderful old chestnuts from, days past where all those quotes about this plant is happening, if this plant's blooming, then that plant's going to be blooming. But what about what happens with the asynchronous phenomenon that Jim was talking about, where suddenly the caterpillars they've already hatched into whatever they're going to morph into, butterfly or
Yeah.
moth, and they're not available for birds.
So,
So I,
yeah, I understand the kind of the general concept.
yep.
I guess specifically, I still don't quite understand what it's an exact measure of. And it might be because it's being called degree days and growing days. And then in my brain, I'm thinking, okay, it's how many days they grow. But that's not what it is because the values are into the thousands and there's only 365 days a year. So
Sure.
that definition isn't right. And I'm still not quite clear on what that quantity is, what it means exactly. I mean, I understand the math. That's not a problem for me at all, but I'm still
Sure.
not quite sure what you're
Yeah.
like. Energy is in joules, BTUs, you know, and that means something. So I have to read a little more about what it's indicating exactly.
The thing that it doesn't tell is how long was the temperature 60 degrees and how long was the temperature 40 degrees or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
That would change the heat unit some, but based on 50-degree soil temperatures, why that's how it's
Mm-hmm.
there's a more of a mathematical equation than what we're
Yeah,
using.
I saw it's actually an integration over some things.
Yeah,
I mean, I
it
looked
gets to
that up
be
on Wikipedia while we were talking, trying to figure.
yeah, it gets to be more complicated in the way we discussed it, but
Yeah,
that's the way
yeah,
the university is providing that for us to keep track of
yeah.
climate change.
Tiffany wrote something interesting in the chat, and maybe this kind of encapsulates this pretty well. Growing degree days is how much heat needs to occur before a species will bloom or emerge in spring. So it essentially more growing degree days earlier in the year will advance the growth of that plant so that the timing is going to be no longer in sync with what it has been and in relationship to other things going on.
Mhm. Okay.
Yeah, it's like a red bud. Let's see, the red buds in the spring don't need as many degree days. They're some of the first to emerge versus something that blooms a little later needs more degree days. Um, but the degree days are not just, it's like an accumulation of, I wouldn't say hours. It's kind of like a heat units, but like,
It
it
is.
do with like the highs and the lows of the days, right, Jim? Like,
Right.
so it's how many hours of
The
the
hard part
day
is
are above 65. And
the
they
hard
add,
part. Yeah, the hard part is the fruit growers with the apple trees and the peach trees, and you get an apple blossom or a peach blossom, and you have a freeze the next night.
oh,
you
yeah.
know, so that kind of ruins the crop
We
totally.
had too many heat degree days too early in the year. Is that why there was that quote you had that said apple blooms in April is bad, but in May is good? Like you'll have a good
Yeah,
that because
yeah,
too many, even if you
right.
get a ton of heat early, it's still too early and another frost could come.
Well, the thing about it is, I think if you wait too late, the blooms are already going to start to close,
Uh,
and you won't get pollination.
that makes sense. The blooms will get ruined by the frost. Or oh, I guess your bees aren't out in time for them.
The blooms will be
Okay.
some will be too warm, and it'll dry the blooms up. You
I
won't get pollination.
Okay. But there is a chapter in the binder and an online module that goes over degree days. And
Yeah.
if and that helped and doing some practice with that. Um,
Well, just go to your cell phone. If you can talk to it, just ask for growing degree days, Ohio State University, and you'll pull up those three slides that we showed you there. And
yeah, I
you
dropped
can-
that link in the chat. Um,
Yeah, thank you for that.
it's kind of cool to see there's still things emerging right now. They had some I like the pictures that that site has about what's emerging now, and it took like 1500 degree days for this. Um, I know like some things need a lot of, I don't know, need a lot, like don't bloom in the first year, need more to germinate, I suppose. I don't know if it applies to seeds. I guess this is just some established plants, right, Jim, for growing degree days and when they, or is it just anything? Oh, I was wondering, Can I apply?
You
Repeat the
repeat
question.
that.
Oh, sorry. I was just thinking out loud, like I'm mixing up seeds. That's totally different. That doesn't need growing degree days. I was thinking about
No,
milkweed
no,
seeds need 2 years before
no.
they merge. But
Right,
this
probably.
applies to like not just plants. The Ohio State site showed moths and different worms for growing degree days, which was pretty interesting.
The one thing I like about the calendar is that and we didn't used to do this. We didn't used to take in the insect populations either with the growing degree days. It was just the bloom times and now that we can over the years, people have said, well, we've had certain things happen to our trees at a certain degree day. And so that's being recorded now and it's put on the calendar. So that's been helpful too. Some things we need, like a Japanese beetles I was talking about, I always go into June, and sometimes you have a lot of them, sometimes you don't. I didn't have very many Asian lady beetles this year. Normally I'm sweeping them off my ceiling in my house, but they have been said to move from the soybean fields when the soybeans start to ripen and they're looking for other things and they come inside trying to get in.
Okay. So Tiffany put something in the chat about the rose mother. Was that? The rose mom did his laundry while he was living at the pond. So that makes it easier for him to live alone in the woods, which I
Yeah,
think that's funny.
yeah,
We visited there, and I think also he had family members that were supporting his endeavor. Like
he
he
was.
wasn't earning his own keep, I don't
That's
think.
right. No man is an
Yeah,
island, not even
I
Thoreau.
I kind of called him homeless. I think he was homeless.
Yeah, that'd be right.
But I'll tell you one thing. Uh, when we went to Concord, I told my wife, I said, we got to go look at this grave site. So it was a Sleepy Hollow cemetery, grave site. And there was a place up on the very top of it was called Author's Ridge. And guess who was up there? Of course, Henry was. All was on his tombstone just said Henry. That was it. They didn't have his last name or anything. It just Henry, big letters, a small tombstone. Ralph Waldo Emerson was up there. Louise May Alcott was up there. And Nathaniel Hawthorne was all buried on that ridge, Author's Ridge, and Sleepy Hollow Cemetery in Concord. Very interesting. Couldn't drive up there. You had to walk up the hill.
That sounds like a fun field trip. Um, so I think even though the phenology concept isn't currently being funded and some of the research that was being done around the state at the various phenology gardens it is not happening as it had been. I know there are some master gardeners, volunteers who are interested in journaling. And I think the practice of paying attention to what's happening when is a really good sound practice. And maybe that idea can be something that people want to pursue on their own and understand more about this because I personally think it's a fascinating topic about how everything is interconnected and how things don't go well when those interconnections are no longer syncing up like they have in the past. It's not easy for plants and animals to evolve fast enough for these things to work out. So If if there aren't any more questions, we can look at wrapping up. If you are claiming continuing education credit hours for this, or if you're an intern getting hours, I would say call it an hour and a half. And I want to thank Jim Rengert for coming out and working on this presentation and talking to us and all the work that he's done in the Learning Garden and helping us understand the concept of phenology and being the guy that has ridden herd on it for a long time. So thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
And I don't know if I'll see many of you before Thanksgiving, but if I do not, I wish you all a very happy and relaxing holiday. And interns, take a break after this week.
Right.
Thanks, everybody. Ready to log out? Stop recording.